A letter to Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of President Franklin Roosevelt, from Mrs. Anne E. Harry, 4801 Howard Street, Reno City, Washington, dated September 30th, 1939. My dear Mrs. Roosevelt, I'm writing to ask if you can help me in any way you can. I have a home at the above address, which I have lived in for 27 years. It is not modern, but truly it is all home. My husband has been a resident of Washington all his life. 2 years ago, he was admitted to St. Elizabeth Hospital. He was home before those years because he was sick and unable to work. I've been unable to pay my taxes as I have no support. I'm afraid of losing my home. I have been unable to sell it because of my husband's condition. If you could confer with the Parks and Planning Commission and ascertain if I can secure some relief, I will be very grateful. Mrs. Annie Herring.
So do you ever catch yourself daydreaming in class, staring out the window, out the classroom window maybe, seeing something you've seen like maybe 100 times, but this time, boom, it catches you like you're seeing it for the first time, and you're wondering, why are there fire hydrants out in the middle of Fort Reno Park? And you guys, this really happened to me when I was 11 years old, and I was in 7th grade at Alice Neal, and I looked out the window, and I saw 2 big red fire trucks hooked up to this fire hydrant, spraying and practicing with their hoses. And if you go out of school today and go exploring, you'll see plenty of odd things over in the field. Ghost steps, retaining walls, metal pipes and covers, clues that once there were people living up there in the middle of the park.
Except this wasn't always a park. Long ago, it was crisscrossed by Native American trails. Then there was a farm the Union Army commandeered during the Civil War because the Army could shoot cannon from there, the highest point in Washington, out onto the roads that the Confederate Army might use just to attack the capital of the Union.
Fort Reno Park became a gathering point for free black men working for the Union Army. This was during the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. If you escaped from a plantation and went to a Union Army camp and enlisted, you were deemed free. Their families joined them their families joined them there, and after the Army left, black families stayed on buying and renting real estate plots.
And so, a village inhabited mostly by black people was born on the edge of Washington. It became a town with increasingly sturdy houses and businesses, grocery stores, a dairy, 3 churches. It was called Reno City, and it was a series of black neighborhoods, running from Cabin John to Broad Ranch Road in Chevy Chase, all the way past Silver Spring. They were united by family and religious ties.
Reno City was a world apart from central Washington, which was crowded and noisy but full of professional opportunities for black people. They moved to Washington to escape racial violence in the Jim Crow South, to take advantage of the city's educational and employment opportunities in D.C. D.C. was home to Howard University, HU, and it provided well-paying, stable jobs in the federal government. Reno City was a working-class suburb catching up to the more established and fancier black communities downtown. They had chickens, turkeys, ducks, hogs in the backyard, pear and cherry and berry trees every spring.
In 1977, Wilson High School students interviewed former Reno City residents about their memories of childhood in the now erased Augusta Moore and Mary Daniels, one-time neighbors in Reno City.
Mr. Ned Warren. Those two were his houses.
I know he had a beautiful strawberry patch. I used to pick them.
And apples and pears. Pears and cherries.
Oh, yeah, he had a very good cherry tree. But my aunt had a cherry tree, so I didn't have to try his cherries.
Remember how it used to be?
In 1904, Reno City's own newly built school opened to educate the black children of the neighborhood, a sign that the community was growing and thriving. Well over 300 families lived in Reno City at the turn of the 20th century. 3/4 of them were black. Here's Augusta again, reminiscing.
When we lived in this row of houses, before we moved across the street on Denison, in this row up here was a white family named Fagan. Here was a family named Hurdle. Here's my mother's family. Here was a colored family, Thomas. Next was a white family. Next was a colored family, the James. Next was white, and next was white. And everybody got along grand. Remember how it used to be?
That success made Reno City a threat to developers' plans to charge high prices for houses in new neighborhoods. At the turn of the 20th century, the White Neighborhood Friendship Citizens Association, which was anything but friendly to African Americans, was reportedly working with DC governors to buy the land in hopes of forcing out or evicting the black community on Reno, where, as a newspaper reported at the time, the houses were small and detrimental to surrounding interests. Put another way, the black neighborhood stood in the way of developing exclusively white neighborhoods, hence covenants and redlining.
The pressure on Reno City only grew through the 1910s and 1920s. Washington city planners, realtors, and bankers teamed up with white citizens associations to formulate one plan after another for developing the Reno City area, creating a park, building a reservoir, and establishing schools. All of these amenities were intended to attract more residents to the growing all-white neighborhoods, and they were used to justify the eviction of the black community that developers described as a financial risk to surrounding areas.
A government commission later reported that the old Negro settlements around the Civil War fort sites have been gradually whittled down. The white population, once indifferent to these hilly regions because they were far out of town, has come to consider them highly desirable residential sections. Few colored families have been able to resist the methodical real estate purchasing agent or fight against the condemnation of their property.
Remember how it used to be?
One who tried mightily to resist was James Neal, an African-American lawyer who represented the Reno city community before the DC government in 1926.
They say that this is an unsightly place, that it is a blight upon the district. Why is it a blight? Simply because Negroes occupy it? They want a white settlement there.
The government decreed raising of Reno City and the scattering of its black residents to far-flung neighborhoods began in the late 1920s. It was nearly complete by the time Wilson High School was built in 1935 to accommodate the children of the growing white population.
One of the last houses to be raised was a white house at 3827 Chesapeake Street, next to the stately Stone Rock Creek Baptist Church, which was also knocked down. And right across from that street, from the white high school, the 5 children of the Scott family, Marjorie, Elizabeth, Francis, Patricia, and baby Spencer, posed behind their house in their Sunday best shortly before Reno City became to an end.
300 homes, 300 families, gone.
A similar eviction was carried out in the Broad Branch Road area, where farms and other property owned by 4 generations of descendants of George Pointer, a freed slave, were seized by eminent domain to clear the way of Lafayette Elementary School.
We are honored to be joined here today by Mr. James Fisher, a 7th generation descendant of George Pointer. I grew up right down the street from Lafayette Elementary School, and James and I might have been neighbors and friends. Instead, his family was scattered to the wind. James, could you share a few words about what happened to your family?
First, I'd like to say that I'm glad to be here, Black History Month, in front of you. But off the script, I'd like to say I had an interesting experience entering the school today. I'm a senior citizen, I'm disabled. Standing in line to go through the metal detector, I noticed that I had to wait a little longer because a few of you decided to bust in front of the line. And I know you know who you are. To the matter at hand. I've entered into my family tree. The emotions were mixed. I wasn't prepared to go beyond maybe 2 or 3 generations of my family tree. It turns out that my family has roots here starting in 1773. And to do research of Black history from 1773 to present day is quite an emotional ride. But I wouldn't have it any other way because I like to know as much as possible about my family and to uncover some mysteries that I had earlier. Maybe asking myself, how did my family become so separated? That stayed with me, and the first time I asked that question was when I was about your age. It was uncovered during this journey. Our family was, like most Black families back then, were very tight-knit. They had to be. They had to depend on one another. It's very emotional for me, and sometimes I will pause. I discovered that what is now Lafayette Park was my family's farm. But after reading and research, I discovered it was more than a farm. they crafted a village. Everyone wants their privacy. Everyone wants their space. That was family space. They could just be. I also learned that once the government took the property, that my family was dispersed. That made it very difficult to remain unified and to support one another. Statistics and the records show that most of the families that were removed from Reno and the adjacent areas moved to DC, Northwest or Southeast Washington, DC. I feel that the statistics, we first moved to Northwest and then Southeast. And I was basically raised in Southeast. So my experience is that that land that was taken from us also took our unity, our togetherness, our network of family support. Thank you for listening.
So, how did it happen that once flourishing black neighborhoods of upper northwest Washington disappeared from one generation to the next? We've seen that there was a concerted effort by real estate developers and the local government to segregate neighborhoods. But there was also growing pressure on the national political stage to advance segregation and white supremacy in Washington, where black residents had managed to get stable federal jobs and find upward mobility.
In 1913, the new presidential administration segregated the federal civil service so that no white worker would have to answer to a black supervisor. It emboldened local leaders and businesses to institutionalize segregation in Washington. The president even hosted a screening of Birth of a Nation in the White House, the racist film that breathed a new life into the Ku Klux Klan.
That president's name was Woodrow Wilson.
President Wilson led an administration that fired and demoted black workers who had found a road to advancement in the federal civil service. These racist policies decimated the black middle class in Washington in the early 20th century and fired up the segregation in housing and education that has kept many in the black community separate and unequal to this day.
John Abraham Davis began working as a laborer at the government printing office in 1882, and over 3 decades he rose through the ranks to supervise 10 other people, including 9 white workers. A month later, after Wilson became president, Davis was demoted and his salary cut. Year after that, he was pushed back down to his starting job as laborer. His once comfortable middle-class life ended in poverty. A century later, Davis's grandson wrote a mournful op-ed in the New York Times.
Wilson was not just a racist. He believed in white supremacy as government policy, so much so that he reversed decades of racial progress.
Federal and local governments devised many ways of pushing black people out of what were considered desirable neighborhoods. Redlining, blockbusting, urban renewal, the construction of highways right through black neighborhoods. You could literally spend years studying all of these legal and financial schemes to understand how our city became segregated by design. It didn't happen by accident. And then there were the racial covenants that Lee mentioned And you could still find on the deeds of homes into the 60s and 70s, binding the buyer not to sell to any people of color. You didn't need yard signs to remind people that much of Upper Northwest was for whites only.
Today, there are next to no black families living inside or around the one-time boundaries of Reno City. The Reno School, a handful of houses, steps leading nowhere, and old hydrants are all that remain of the subdivision. The affluent white neighborhood surrounding our school was built on the ruins of a decimated black community, and this school's name honors one of the men who unleashed the destruction.
Sometimes you walk by something day after day and you don't really think about it. But one day you see it, whether it's a hydrant in the middle of a park or the name of a president on your school.
My dear Mrs. Roosevelt, I'm writing to ask if you can help me in any way you can. I have a home at the above address, which I have lived in for 27 years. It is not modern, but truly, it is all home. Remember how it used to be? Look at it now. Nothing but empty fields, ghost steps, a hydrant, 300 homes, 300 families, gone, gone.
One day, when the glory comes, it'll be us, it'll be us. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory. Glory, oh, glory, oh, glory. Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon. Formed against, yes, glory is destined. Every day, women and men become legends. Since the go against our skins become lessons. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtapositioning us. Justice for all, just ain't specific enough. One sun died, spirit is revisiting us. True and living in us. Resistance is us. That's why rules are set on the bus. That's why we march through Ferguson with our hands up. When it goes down, we man up. They say stand down, and we stand up. Shout hand up, keep pointing to the mountaintop, and we ran up. When the glory comes, it'll be us, it'll be us. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure, we will be sure. Oh, glory. Glory, oh, glory, oh, glory. Now the war is not over, victory isn't won. We will fight on to the finish, until it's all done. We'll cry glory, oh, glory, we'll cry glory, oh, glory. Silence now for every man, even woman. Even Jesus got his crown in front of a crowd. They march with the torch, we gon' run with it now. Never look back, we done gone hundreds of miles. From dark roads, he rose to become a hero. Facing the league of justice, the power was his people. Enemy is lethal, the king became legal. Under a raw eagle, because that we breathe through this thing. The music is because that we breathe through victory. No one can win the war individually. It takes the wisdom of the elders and young people's energy. Welcome to the story we call victory. The coming of my eyes have seen the glory. One day, when the glory comes, it'll be ours. It'll be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure. We will be sure. Oh, glory. Glory. Oh, glory. Oh,
Good morning, everyone. How are you? I'd love to get some of your thoughts, but first, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Of course, you know your students. Let's give them a hand once more. I am Zerlene Hughes Sproul. I'm a Wilson parent of a junior. I am here with DC History and Justice Collective. There are some members also in the audience, if you could raise your hands. Welcome, welcome, thank you. And so, has anyone heard of the DC History and Justice Collective? Anyone heard of hashtag rename Wilson High School? All right, so to give you some quick background, the collective's goals are to educate the community, that includes you, about the untold history of Black loss and support efforts to unravel the centuries-old social, economic, and cultural divisions that characterize Northwest DC. One of the main pieces of our work, one of our main goals, one of our campaigns is to, in fact, rename Woodrow Wilson High School. We are inviting stakeholders like you, alumni, community members of Northwest DC, and community members of the rest of DC to join the campaign or at least consider what it means to go to a school named for someone, a president, who had the perspectives, the philosophies, the thoughts, the mindset that you just heard about today. What you heard is the story of displacement, but you all may have heard a different word. Anyone, any word come to mind? Say it louder. Gentrification. Sound familiar, gentrification? Yeah. Okay. So do you feel like gentrification is what was happening back then? Anybody want to stand up? Offer any comparisons, contrasts? Or shout it out? Nobody want to stand up? Over there, go. What you heard today, does it sound familiar? All this was happening decades ago, but we are now in 2020. Before it was called displacement, or there was no name for it, and now many people are calling it gentrification.
What I know about gentrification is that it is like the changing of a neighborhood that leads to people being pushed out of that area, and usually ends up being Black people or people of color.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, in the middle, go ahead, please. Nice and loud.
I just moved here from Oregon, but even in Oregon, where the population is only 2% Black, we're still facing gentrification. Even in the little Black neighborhoods in Portland, they're still being split up, made to go to different schools in different areas. They're like the weird school areas that they feel. And it's crazy that it's happening all over. Like that's on the other side of this country, and it's still happening today. And that's wild.
all due respect. All due respect. Look at your skin and look at mine. All due respect. This is me being respectful.
I'd like to add, so all these points are indeed valid, so I appreciate you sharing. I'd also like to say, well, let me ask, do I look like a gentrifier? No. But I am, in fact, a gentrifier. I am from Los Angeles, California. Anybody from LA, California, West Coast? Okay, okay. And I moved to Washington, D.C. about 13 years ago, and I moved to 2 different communities. And because of my education level, because of my age, I was changing the dynamic of that neighborhood. So that is also a piece I want folks to consider when they are talking about gentrification, but I'll keep that piece short. So before we end, and there's a really great, fantastic treat outside waiting for you all, I just want you all to understand some of the different perspectives, understand your history, understand that history can in fact repeat itself. Does anyone see any similarities between President Wilson and any other presidents we've had since then?
One answer to that question is Wilson is a lot like Trump in the sense that he does not want any competition from Congress or the Supreme Court. He sees the executive as the branch. Don't bother me with requests for interviews or documents. Wilson is the only president in American history of the 45 with a PhD, and yet he has all these backward, racist, white supremacy ideas. And I mean, I can understand in the context of where he grew up, but you'd think with all the reading and all the education, he might have been a little more sensitive to people.
So what you can do after having heard these stories is take action. You can do something in your own community. You can talk about this and share the news with someone else. With the DC History and Justice Collective, you can join our campaign. That means going to Twitter. Anybody use Twitter? You can go, all right, good, good, good. You can also use Instagram and Snapchat to talk about these issues. And you can join our campaign in several ways. You can just go to our website to learn more, rename wilsonhs.org. You can go to our Twitter account and join the conversation. You can even debate. And we have a petition. If you are so inclined, you can take a look at what we're saying, and you can sign the petition or you can share the petition. It's onechange.org. You've got the link right there. You can do a Google search. But we want to make sure that you are informed. So please, indeed, go to the website and learn more. We've got frequently asked questions. We've got quotes. And there's other ways you can take action. So please, take action. And then finally, and I'll answer your question or let you offer your comment. Outside, when you are done, in an organized fashion, of course, Ben and Jerry's is scooping ice cream. And one of those flavors that they're scooping is a limited batch just released in September in cooperation with the Advancement Project National Office. That's actually where I work. And it's called Justice Remixed. Has anyone heard of that new flavor, Justice Remixed? So it's a funky flavor. It's chocolate and cinnamon gobs of ice cream. It's spicy brownie and cinnamon bun dough all together. But it's good. If you don't like it, there's going to be other flavors. And because of the name, Justice Remix, we are challenging people to reimagine justice, to figure out what safety and justice looks like. And we're also asking people to take action. So this is one way. So now, go.
We can't hear.
August Wilson is an option we're looking at. We're looking at changing it to Reno City High School. Just a bunch of ideas. Yeah, I know August Wilson is the main one I think that I really would appreciate because we learned about August Wilson from middle school. We read fences in our freshman class, I believe. And it would still be Wilson, but we would have a better person in the forefront because he is a historically famous and representative person of the Black community.
If you feel so inclined to weigh in, that's where the petition comes in, or that's where going on the website, or doing some investigation on your own. So good question, I appreciate
Also,
that.
I want to say something. Okay, so changing the name of the school is very important, but if you're not changing the demographics of the school, was like it's I see the purpose of changing the name, but changing it to August Wilson, and then we have a majority. For one, Wilson's demographics are about to change like I don't know what. The black population is already decreasing. 600 white freshmen came in this year. So if we change the name of the school, but the demographics are still the same, would your parents let you go to a school named after a black person? Because I know some of y'all parents in here ain't. I'm just stating facts. I know some of them in here see race before they see the person.
All right, so moving away from the name change, I just wanted to see if any more thoughts have been percolating about what you've heard this morning. Anyone else? Yes, thank you.
Stand up.